Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends on where each one is now. I am proud to be with you today and moderate this session about the flooding by cities and Dutch innovative firms. Let me before introduce myself. I am Luail Atrash. I am working as a local project leader for the Blue Deal and Waterworks Partnership under the Young Expert Program for the Palestinian Authority region. Today, we have expert speakers. They will share their experience with us about flooding and how the Netherlands overcame this challenge. Let me introduce to you the speaker. Johan Verleen works for the city of Rotterdam as the program director of urban adaptation. Professor Floris Bograd is a senior consultant at Deltars. Martin Wheat is a founding partner of Okra. Mr. Jaap Kleen worked with Fitfin Laspous as a project manager, climate adaptation and urban water management. Vicky Lynn working as a project coordinator with Blue 21. Each speaker will take for 10 minutes. After that, we will go to the Q&A for 20-25 minutes. So please don't hesitate to share your questions on the chat if you have, and please mute your mic when you don't need to talk. Now, I would like to go to the Mr. Johan Verleen. Mr. Johan, he worked for the City Rotterdam as the Program Director Urban Adaptation and leads the Rotterdam Climate Adaptation Plan, Rotterdam Weatherwise. The goal of this plan is to take the next step in preparing of the city for severe climate hazards like heavy rains, flooding, heat, and droughts. So, Mr. Johan, you can start, please.
Introduction. This morning we had a session about heat, now about flooding. Maybe it should be the other way around because it's quite hot here at the moment. And I have the pleasure to keep you all awake right after lunch, so please pay attention. Flooding in Rotterdam. Yes, we are a delta city. We live right next to the river, right next to the sea. So water is a real challenge for us as a city because water comes from four sides. So we have the river flowing to our city, and when snow starts to melt in other countries, the water will eventually flow through our city. So we see rising river levels, and even areas of the city that flood maybe once or twice a year. And the people like it so much living next to the water that they even accept things like that. Then the sea, well, luckily we have a storm surge barrier in the west, the Maaslandkering. When that closes off, the city is totally protected for the sea, at least for now. Groundwater can be a challenge, so low groundwater tables during periods of drought, and we have those old homes that are founded on wooden poles, those poles rot and the house will shift, or higher groundwater tables when your basements will flood. And a lot of the basements in Rotterdam are transformed into bedrooms and kitchens. You don't want that. Precipitation, rainfall is a real challenge for our city. And it was already said this morning, 85% of our city is below sea level. So everything that's blue in here is below the level of the river. So we have quite a good drainage system and around 1,100 pumping stations to keep our city dry. But we see with climate change and high intensity rainfall that our sewage system cannot cope with that amounts of water. So we have to do something to our city. But I already showed you this in the heat session. We used to be a water city, so there was quite a good surface water drainage system there, but the city council decided to transform Rotterdam into a car city. Hence, a lot of the former canals, this was actually a canal, this is called Goudse Singel, and Singel is the Dutch word for canal. From a heat perspective, this is not good, but from a water perspective, this is also not good. It's totally paved, every drop of water that falls here goes to our sewage system. Sewage system cannot cope with the water, hence water on the street. So we have to work towards a climate adaptive city and really integrate climate adaptation into our urban planning. And let me give you some examples of that. It's about large-scale solutions, and this is problematic in a densely built city, large-scale solutions and multifunctionality. And what you see here is a big water retention reservoir, but it also doubles up as an Olympic rowing track, so it can be used for rowing competition. And it actually helps in improving the retention capacity of our polder system, but it's outside of the boundaries of the city of Rotterdam. But we don't have space to do things like this, so we invest in a city, as a city, in solution that helps in keeping our city dry, even if it's outside of the boundaries. Also, area redevelopments. We have a lot of former port areas in the city, and the ports gradually moved towards the sea. Unused port areas. This is Rijnhaven, and actually in the middle is the floating office of the Global Center on Adaptation. It will be transformed into a tidal park, so it increases the recreational value of the area. It's also quite interesting to develop there for real estate developers, but it also helps in flood-proofing the city, so it also has this multifunctionality in mind. And also on a small space, this is the water square. There was the first one, it's already 10 years old, but we have a lot of these all around our city. They all look completely different because we always design them together with the citizens. So they serve the purpose of water retention, and at the same time it can be used for sports and theater. And there's even on this one, there's a church that does services in the big reservoir on a sunny Sunday. But at the same time, 1.7 million liters of water can be stored here. And one thing we try to do is link in with everything that's happening in the city. And a big opportunity for us is sewage renewal. Rotterdam is built on sloppy soil. We have 2,400 kilometers of sewage pipe which keep the city dry. This is really the core of a robust system. But the pipes, they just sink, so we have to renew them every 60 years. So we renew 40 kilometers of sewage pipe every year. So also we open up 40 kilometers of roads every year. And then we can think, do we need all the bricks back? Or do we even need a road back? Only in this location, this was a road. The road wasn't used. There were parking spaces, weren't used. And now it looks like this. It's a park, and the people that live there asked us, we want more green in our area. It's a park, but there are also 3 wadis in there, so water reservoirs where water can be stored. So it's good for recreation and water storage. Also that multifunctionality is in there. So there's a huge opportunity to do a lot of this in the city in the next few years. And obviously, you cannot give up every road. So it's always looking at what's possible here, but also invite citizens in an early stage, before we even have a project, to think with us, what do you like? What kind of solutions do you want? So it's not the traditional way of the city knowing what's good for the citizens, but together the city, and maybe even the private sector, and the citizens know what's good for their streets. And another one is what I think is quite important, is about the topic of sharing the risk. So we as a city can only do something, we can invest in the public space, but we need everyone. So it's also important to share the things that are going on in your city. So we have quite complex flood models of the city. We use it as engineers to come up with new solutions in the sewage system, or maybe add some pumping stations. But we also wanted to share this with the broader audience, even the citizens, real estate developers, social housing corporations. So what we did is transform the flood model into a label from A to E. And in the Netherlands, we are quite familiar with this from the energy label systematic. And A is a home that is perfectly safe from flooding due to heavy rainfall, and E, well, you definitely have a problem during heavy rainfall. And we communicated this with our citizens. We even made it a goal of our executive board of the city that said, okay, we have to improve the safety of our homes. And we developed this together with the insurance company and the engineering company. So it's really about working together, sharing the risk, and taking action together. So my message for today is look at all the different skills that are there. So big projects, small projects, and also share the risk and do it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Johan. It's really an amazing presentation, and it's nice to know how the Netherlands is dealing with the flooding or the heavy rainfall, especially with you serve it in the reservoirs and slowly you discharge to the channels again. Thank you again. Now we will go to the Professor Flores Bochard is a senior consultant at Deltars. with over 25 years of experience in research and consultancy in global climate adaptation. His project focuses more in implementation of nature-based solution and sustainable urban drainage systems. So, Professor Flores, please.
Thank you so much. Yeah, of course, thanks for sharing my knowledge here. Indeed, my name is Floris Bogaert. Let me look to the slide. Oh, I don't see the slide. Okay, the first slide, please, shows, yes, perfect. Yeah, thanks so much. Integrated approach to flooding solutions. It's about climate adaptation. So next slide, please. They mostly, when you know me, I'm well known as a flood fighter. That means that I flood streets to fight flooding. That might sound weird, but I will explain that later in one of the slides. So next slide, please. Then I work at Deltares as a consultant, being a professor in Groningen, and also one of the pictures that Johan showed. I also work as affiliated researcher at the Global Center of Adaptation, which is in Rotterdam and Groningen, actually. Next slide. If the dikes would break, you probably know Netherlands below sea level. I might have to move to Dubai, as you can see here. So water is a real focus in my work. Next slide. Where I want to talk to you about in a very short presentation is a strategy for integral flooding solutions. And of course, we have a lot of challenges. We have a lot of solutions that we can share. And I think a major strategy would be to analyze the problems and the solutions, going to form an ambition, and then as soon as possible come to action. Next slide. And just to show you some of the challenges that we face, Johan already named them, so I will go quickly over them. Of course, it's about flooding in this section, but if you cope with floodings, of course, you will also do an integrated approach, also tackle heat stress or drought or subsidence, being in sinking cities, for example. And also, next slide, it has a very large effect on water quality, air quality, urbanization, more paved areas in the city that we have to solve. So next slide. I think these artists very visualized what we have to do. We have to open up the cities again and give more room for water where it can be stored and slowly infiltrate to the ground. So we tackle floodings, also drought, of course, and heat stress in a lot of situations. Next slide. And then you will see that cities are not planned that smart from the old days, as Johan referred to as well. We tend to give green less space, or just in one space, as you can see here. Gray and green are really separated in this case. So one of the challenges is really to go with an integrated approach and to see how we combine them. Next slide. And there's some great solutions all around the world, as you can see here. Rooftops in China, you see autarkic homes in Thailand that are really self-sustainable. A very nice green wall, one of the biggest in Europe, in Spain, for example. And maybe one of my favorite is the one in the middle. You see some musical instruments in a building in Dresden. When it rains, it makes music. And every time it rains, it makes a different symphony, so to say. And people go out in the rain and tape the noise that it makes from this. So it should reach participation and stakeholders in this case as well. Next slide. So there are a lot of solutions that you can find, swales, rain gardens, water squares, thermal pavement. Those are all small-scale solutions that you can implement in the urban area. Next slide. But of course, the big challenge is how to make that in an integrated approach, because it's not only about the technical means. Most things can be solved in a technical way, but it's also about the infrastructure, or the bottom-up, or the governance, or the participation of people. And these are some high tracks that we do at the Global Center of Adaptation, for example, and that is solution brokering. So offering solutions to your problems with inspiration from projects from all around the world. Next slide. And as been said, I think one of the strategies, the main strategies in this short presentation would be first to analyze, see where your problems are, and it can be done by models. I will show you in the next slide. And then you have an ambition, and then you also should go to action. And here's some climate quick scan models. It doesn't have to be most of the people already know where the problems are, of course, to be exact. And then one of the things we're talking about floodings, but you see a long list of things that you can easily model in urban areas that can benefit from for an integrated approach. So it's not only technical, it's also about the opinion, for example. Social media can be modeled as well, so you can see what the perception is of people and combine that in a technical structure. And that's mostly integrated approach. Next slide. Here are some visualizations, 3D visualizations, how you can relate to people. You can fly through cities and see where the problems are, so they relate to the problem and are more tentative to give a solution to that. Next slide. And it's always good to give an example. Copenhagen is a well-known example. In 2011, there was 150 millimeters in 2 hours on that city, causing billions of damage. And of course, it's quite a best management practices now because they came to action quite soon. Next slide. So I did some flood modeling there, as you could see the models before, and then it's basically a puzzle to see where your buildings are, where's the green, where are the squares, where can you make maybe water squares, as Johan was talking about, or other features to fit that into the city. So you can make it into a fun game, so to say. Next slide. And of course, there are a lot more solutions. Here's some things in a Dutch text because they're Dutch, so maybe it's an inspiration as well. So it's really greening cities, and well, I collect them in a tool that I will show you later, and you can maybe use that, for example. Next slide. But it's very important to also know that you can implement them, you can design, you see great pictures of it, but also it has to work in long term. Maybe 60 years, as Johan was talking about, from roads, but some municipalities more have 20 or 40-year cycles. So it has to be functioning, hydraulic capacity, but also people have to like it in the area. And that's where flood fighting comes in. So we flood these systems that are implemented in the Netherlands already 20 or 30 years and see how they work, and we learn from them, and we spread that in international guidelines so you can benefit from that too. Next slide. And all these guidelines and lessons learned from these projects you can find on adaptation platforms, and platforms are of course location specific. So here you see a lot of QR codes all around the world of platforms that you could use to find information about this, what works, what doesn't work, the lessons learned that I'm talking about. Next slide. And just to give you one example of that is climate change. In this book, there are a lot of platforms that you could use. Climatescan.org ticks a lot of boxes, so you can use it yourself to share your solutions and also to find specific solutions in Rotterdam, but every city around the world, for example. So next slide. And what is nice, this is a Google-based map. It has over 8,000 now. So you can visit areas as South Africa has been indicated, or Europe. You can go to Malmo in Sweden, of course Copenhagen that I showed, and you can share those solutions and get more information about it. Next slide. And with this, you can find the DNA of cities, because no city is different in the world, so to say. So it needs a holistic approach, an integral flooding. And in these pictures that you see here, also Rotterdam is there, but a lot of other cities as Johannesburg or Malmo or Copenhagen, you can see what the DNA of a city is. Sometimes a green roof works, or sometimes more bioswales, or Wadi, as Johan called them, which is actually an Arabic name, so probably a lot of you are familiar with it. So with the DNA of these cities, you can find your own strategy, which makes it difficult as well. But if you follow the strategy of analyzing, form your ambition, see what kind of cost, governance, or space you have to implement these measures, and then of course come directly to action and learn from it back, as you saw in those tools. So basically that's my message. Next slide. I hope this has been helpful, that you can use the tools, that you can share that knowledge. Next slide. And of course, I hope, next slide, that Deltares could help you out with all the challenges that we have around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Flores. Indeed, it's nice to learn how we can, as countries, learn from each other, how each country deal with the flooding. So it's a good presentation. Thank you. Now we will go to the Mr. Martin Knaut, a funding partner of OKRA. His strength is defining strategic visions and scenarios and creating strong specials designs. He's mostly active in design, complex urban and landscape development project and working to the node. So Mr. Martin, you can start, please. We don't hear you. We don't hear you.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy that I can tell you something about our experiences in water management. Basically, we are a Netherlands-based office and situated along a medieval canal. So water is around us, and it's close to in our heart. And what I would like to tell you is the design approach. We are a design office for urban development and for landscape architecture. And that's our point of view on looking at it. Related to sponge cities, we think that it is really imperative to have a holistic approach for urban and landscape development. In fact, we should create wide, strong frameworks and landscapes that have the power to adapt on the natural conditions. And as the previous speakers told you before, yes, we believe also that creating green public realm within the urban areas is crucial. First, we move to China, to Shenzhen, which is an area in the Shenzhen region. And in fact, the question for that was raised for the competition that we were working on was to create a new 12th district of Shenzhen. It's along the bay, and at this moment there are small fishermen's villages and mountains along the bay. And usually when these urban challenges are at stake, people start to create a lot of housing along the bay and close by the sea, because it is, of course, it has the nice views. It is the landscape that is, let's say, front row. But we told the Chinese officials that it would be interesting not to do this only and to connect to the landscape. And in fact, we did this project with MLA Plus and IBR. We said, well, you should create a seawater strategy, linking the hills towards the water, and create an ecology framework before you actually start working on the urban development. So in the diagram that we made was, first we colored large areas green in between the hills and the sea. And we're also drawing a long green line along the coasts. So coastal defense is not just thinking about how the minimum of amount of meters that you can sacrifice to coastal defense. No, you should create a landscape that is that strong and robust that you can actually conquer with several calculations, generations of calculations on seawater rise. I think that's important, to start from the landscape. And then gradually we started working on the green and the blue structure and defining it with typologies, so that the blue typologies also could be part in the green areas, but also linked to the urban areas, so that if you would provide urban spaces, that these were also connected to the water system, and that the sponge is not just only working in the urban area, but in the green areas as well. And for the coast, it was important to create, as I said, this robust landscape that in fact, it should be that strong that maybe sometimes it can lose some of its dimension. Sometimes it can gain some extra space, because the sea also sometimes gives instead of taking it. It also should provide room for ecology and recreation, so it becomes multifunctional. The wider you make it, the stronger and robust it will be, but also the more meaning it will give to people. So that was actually the first asset, which creates, in fact, various cities. So it's a pearl of a necklace of cities instead of just one big city along the water. And I think here you can see that landscape and urbanity is integrated and brings a new future for cities. The next project that I would like to show is the London project. We are, I was a bit ahead of what was clicked in. We're now moving to London. Meridian Water. That's one of the largest building locations in London along the River Lee, which is a side river of the River Thames, the most well-known river in London, of course. And since the city is actually expanding, they are in need of creating a lot of housing. And in our view, you should combine, again, green with housing. So the number of housing is of course, very high, but you should still create for sponge city principles and create what we call a toolbox of water-sensitive design. That's crucial, we think, to tackle the new needs for the city. In fact, the city is also changing since they create Crossrail, which is a super infrastructure rail system. These locations at the outskirts of the city become closer to the city and will be there in 15 minutes from the city center. And again, we say, start a holistic approach and define the tools for water catchment, water storage, reuse of water, and water in public realm prior to urbanization. And of course, there was the urbanization program of 10,000 homes on 86 hectares. There was also the program of creating a better space for residential areas adjacent to it. But we said, well, please start with the green. And they accepted this proposal and said, well, okay, yes, we're going to link it to landscape framework and urban development. To do so, we have defined some tools. And you could say that if you provide tools, you can have them in 4 categories. The first one is, please do something upstream. If you capture the water problem upstream, you prevent the area from flooding if there's a problem on the higher parts of the river. Then secondly, you need to provide a good area that you're not causing the problems downstream. So within the urban area, you should have several tools to capture the water, to store it, to filter it, and bring it in small doses to the river. The third one category is, I think, about recycling and water quality. We are, of course, always thinking about quantities, but in urban areas, quality is as important as quantity. If there's polluted water, it affects the groundwater table. And in all metropolitan areas, I think water supply for drinking water is already at stake and is if you don't do the right things, also a bit in danger. And the last category, I would also say, make water visible in the urban areas. So make it as a pleasure. So we designed some sections and showed how these tools could be applied in a design way. Otherwise, it becomes technical. And of course, technically, you can solve everything. But if you want to have people's awareness, in fact, you should design it as well. So some more pictures of how that works are the next ones. And we have worked on the first area. This is development area that is actually the starting development. We said also, even in phasing, you can do this. So if you start developing, maybe first you should make green nurseries for trees, and maybe you should create already the green structure prior to building. The last project that here again some images of how that works in the small scale and how the tools are connected to the map. you could see that it gradually works down to the small scales, and that in the end you see this biosphere in the neighborhood, in the residential area. But it all comes together to work with the big scale and the smaller scale, starting from the green framework and then gradually bringing it down to, let's say, the human scale. And in the end, the eye-level perspective, that people that are living there can understand what do we mean with all these abstract tools and diagrams. Yeah, the last project I would bring forward is a project in the Netherlands, Kustwerk Katwijk. It is about sea defense and coastal town economy. In fact, what we can learn from this one is that, again, a holistic approach is required. Before we started here, the engineering solution was at the table, and then the engineer said, you can make a big dike in front of the coastal town, and then it will be protected. Of course it will be protected, but all the inhabitants, they were really angry. They were upset because the coastal town was always connected to the sea. So in fact, the government wanted to provide something good for the people, but people said, well, but we want to experience that we live by the sea. And in that part of that social part was actually at stake. So we said, yes, we can make a holistic solution, but then we should maybe enlarge the problem a little bit more. So not only the coastal problem, but also the urban problem, the parking problem, and other items that were at stake in the urban area. And creating this holistic approach meant that we said, well, we can make large dunes instead of only having the dike, and that might be as strong as possible. Then the engineers were calculating, and we can thank them, the Dutch engineers, they really do great work. They said, well, yes, it can work. And in fact, here you can see an image that we created a parking facility as well. So within the sea defense, a special area was in a dike, and you see here the building pitch for a parking garage. So gradually we made this landscape, which is already robust for coastal defense, but also for finding the solutions for the parking problem, so that the boulevard became better and the city became better connected. Meanwhile, as you see there during construction, these were, of course, technical works, but we had to persevere. And the good thing about this, the lesson you can take from it, is that everyone was involved. So it was the national government, the provincial government, the water boards, the people from the town. But it was also the engineers. We are as landscape architects, the architects were involved. So it was a collaboration. And if you want to achieve this, I think you should work all together on this water management. And starting from, let's say, what do we want to achieve? How can we create a kind of interesting dream landscape that is our new city, that it creates our perspective on the better world, and that really is dynamic and ready for the future. So some more images you can see here on the photographs, that in the end, after a long period of working, it was realized. And if you will walk here, you will never experience that there is just a dike underneath, or that there is a parking garage underneath. You think it's a dune landscape connected to the town. I think that's important, that perception. And gradually nature will take over. And that makes that these nature-based solutions have a potential to create force for long periods. Next, please. No more next. It's a conclusion. The superstorm. The Dutch program was on the coast was creating superstorm-proof coastal areas, but we always will have these challenges within the city and along the rivers and along sea. I think it's key to have this comprehensive and integrated approach. Let's do it all together, and let's do it for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Really, it's an interesting presentation. I like how we should stand together to solve this problem. The government alone, it's not possible to solve this problem. So we should stand together, citizens, the civilians, all the government, all the organization in the country to solve this problem. Thank you again. Now we will go to the Mr. Yab Klein, works with Fitven plus Boost Consulting Engineers as a senior consultant and project manager, climate adaptation and urban water management. He graduated from the Delft University of Technology as civil engineering. Mr. Yab, please, the floor for you.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon. I hope you can all hear me. Maybe you can show the first slide and directly continue to the second one. I'll say I'm Jaap Klein. I'm working at Witteveen en Bos as a consultant, urban drainage and climate adaptation. Our company is based in the Netherlands, and many of our services are related to water, delta cities, or climate adaptation. We have several international offices, also one here in Dubai, and some of my colleagues, I think, are at this moment in the pavilion. Well, you can find more information on our website on this slide, but I will continue with the presentation. Maybe the next slide. This presentation is about the use of the sustainable design principles in the prevention of urban flooding. This should summarize our approach. It's in the second part of the presentation, I will show some examples of how we do it in reality. The design of resilient drainage systems is part of a larger process that starts with the problem identification, what's maybe the things mentioned by the city of Rotterdam or the modeling by Flores, and leads to construction of measures and afterwards monitoring of the results afterwards. The largest challenges related to climate change appear in existing urban areas where the people are already there, the functions are already there, all land is occupied, and especially in high residential low-lying areas such as delta cities. And already mentioned before, flooding is not the only challenge in those areas. There are more challenges like shortage of water in dry periods, heat stress, biodiversity, problems related to traffic, pollution, energy. They have all their own challenges. And the question is, how can we deal with all those challenges together? And what we see is what makes even more complex is that in most urban areas, about 60 to 70% of the land is private owned. It's very hard to solve all the problems on the little spaces with public area. In collaboration with other people, landowners, stakeholders is needed to come to a conclusion and to come to solutions. What I see as a perfect example of a combined solution is greening of the urban areas. It leads to more water retention. It contributes to filtering of water, improving the water quality, biodiversity, and in hot periods it also reduces the heat stress, and the green spots make the area more attractive. Please go to the next slide. What's at Witteveen en Bos a few years ago, we developed the sustainable design principles. The purpose of these principles is to translate the UN sustainability goals to our engineering practice, and we look where can we apply them. We use these principles to obtain future-proof design, development of urban plans, and design at several stages, from conceptual design and feasibility study to our final design. For each of these design process, we assess which principles are applicable. And I'll give you a short introduction to those 7 principles. First of all, already mentioned by Martin, is the nature-based design of building with nature. And we want to make use of natural processes in our fighting the flooding. For water, this might be infiltration of water, but also filtering of water to improve the water quality. The next one is about circular design, close energy and material circles. Can we use existing materials when introducing new measures? or can materials get an other function afterwards, after the life cycle of the structure. Multifunctional design, as I already mentioned, there are many challenges in our cities. Address them in an integrated approach and try to avoid single-purpose measures. Then societal design is about integrating social and economic teams in the project. What will be the social economic benefit and effects, and will society profit from it? Participation, that's the fifth. As I already mentioned, in most projects we have to deal with many stakeholders and use their input in the project. Certainly when we want to serve several goals and challenges in one time. Trias, it's about limiting the consumption of natural resources, raw materials and energy. And at last, flexible design. For future-proof climate adaptation, flexibility is extremely important, because we don't know what will happen in the future, what will be the impact of climate change maybe in 10 or 20 years. And I give an example. If you have to design an embankment along a river, construction or soil or clay is much more flexible than the application of concrete walls, which has, when you have once designed it, very difficult to change it. For the type of projects mentioned here in urban flooding, flexibility, nature-based solutions, multifunctional design, and participation are, in my opinion, most important. And now I will, in the next slides, show some examples of our projects. These examples show projects at different levels, from river basins and cities to neighborhoods and the scale of individual plots. The first example is the Trinidad Drainage Project in the Caribbean area. The island of Trinidad suffers from frequent flooding, and it leads to huge economic impact. We prepared a strategic plan to deal with this problem. In the second step, we prepared measures for some specific locations. And when you go to the next slide, what we see in this project, it's not only about structural measures like building dikes or enlarging rivers, but non-structural measures and institutional measures have at least the same urgency and are in general more cost-effective. For Trinidad, and when we look at the most important, increasing public awareness of flood risk, obtaining hydrologic data, and improved spatial planning, the permitting system for new housing developments were the main recommendations. The next sheet is about the integrated water management master plan in Baku, in Azerbaijan. It's also an example of a large area. In Baku, flooding has become more and more a problem in the recent years, although it's an arid situation, but flooding problems have occurred in the last few years. At the same time, as I mentioned, it's an arid area, but there's a lack of water. Therefore, we don't want to discharge the water directly to the sea, but store the water on land. And this is combined with a third challenge, remediation and improving water quality in the lakes in the area, which have huge issues related to pollution. And now I go to the, I think we have to go to the end one before, one extra. Now we go forward in the sheets. I think the Mozambique. Next one. Next. Yes. In Mozambique, we did a green infra project. It's an older project where we work together with several partners, among which is also the Paris, which also here presenting. In this project, we looked at the solutions for the improvement of the local drainage system and solve the problem with local flooding. We did it in close collaboration with the people living there and the local government. What is their opinion and how can we address their solution in the program, and by the introduction of nature-based solutions in this area. Now I go to the next sheet. This one is one from our colleagues in Belgium. We prepared the water plan for the city of Antwerp. We started at the scale of the whole city and defined ambitions and principles together with local governments and stakeholders. And in the next step, we identified solutions for flooding and winning in the level of the neighborhood and developed standard design principles for streets. And these measures do not only result in water retention, but also reduce heat stress and make the area more pleasant to live in. And going to the next slide, maybe. This is also about Antwerp, and we go to the next one. This is the Floriade in the city of Almere in the Netherlands. The Floriade is a 5-yearly exhibition in the Netherlands. Originally, it was based on agricultural developments in the Netherlands. The theme for 2022 will be greening of the cities. And after the exhibition, the area will be transformed to a residential area. What I want to show here is the water retention at a local level. Maybe you can show the next slide. In this case, on the plots. And the purpose is to reduce the discharge to the local stormwater system and at the same time save water for a dry period, because it will be a quite green area. And the purpose is the goal is to keep the existing streams where possible. For all developers in the area, it's mandatory to have minimum water storage at a plot level. They are free to choose how to reach it, but the options to reach it are, for example, bioswales, water retention on the roofs, or the implementation of water tanks. And at last, I want to summarize this presentation with the lessons we learned in our project. At first, what we learned is that in most cases, single-purpose measures to deal with local flooding are not cost-effective, and we have much more challenges in the cities. Therefore, we propose a multi-purpose approach to deal with the challenges in the urban areas. The use of the sustainable design principles helps to address all themes that have to focus on future-proof, resilient design. In this approach, stakeholder involvement and including private landowners is essential. These sustainable design principles can be applied to all kind of projects, not only urban flooding. And when you look at the slide, you see a link to a video where you can find more information. That's my short introduction. Thank you for your attention, and goodbye.
Sorry, Loy, you are muted.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Martin, for this presentation. Now we will go to the Vicky. She holds master's degrees in climate studies from Wageningen University. She believes that flooding contributes to solving 21st century urban challenges, such as climate change, land scarcity, etc. So, Vicky, you can start. Sorry.
Thank you for your introduction, Loy. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. Great. I'm Vicky, project coordinator at the Blue 21, and I'm very happy to have the chance to share with you what we do and why we do at the Blue 21 and our big mission of providing circular and resilient living space for billions with floating projects. So first of all, next slide, please. If we look at the global challenges for 2050, we see that with increasing urbanization and overpopulation, most cities will still need to be built for providing living space for people. And if we look at the climate, a lot of these cities are actually situated in areas where projected sea level rise would be 30 centimeters. And at the Blue 21, we conducted a study on calculating how much space might be needed for food for 2050. We realized that, well, the space is not enough at all. And so what do we do? How do we find the extra space? Next slide, please. If you look at most cities now, they resort to the most conventional way of creating space, which is land reclamation. Here you could see very ambitious land reclamation projects in Denmark or in Hong Kong, and as well as other cities across the world. But the reality is, next slide please, we are running out of sand. The demand for sand and gravel for construction is rising so much faster than natural resources can sustain, and the prices will only soar. Land reclamation is in fact not the only solution to create extra space. Next slide, please. At the Blue 21, we have been investigating into creating new space on the water. We could create space for food production, energy production, and extra space for living. We could capture the nutrients that are discharged by cities nowadays and reutilize those nutrients into food and energy production, for instance, and close the loop, creating a circular economy. Next slide, please. So with what is floating development? Floating development usually consists of two parts. There's the superstructure, buildings on top or other functions for living, for recreational purposes, or for logistics, food and energy production. And there's also the substructure or the floaters, which is usually built with steel, concrete, amongst other materials. And this whole structure is usually moored to the bottom of a water body or fixed to a quay wall so that the whole structure doesn't float away. With floating, it's adaptive to changing water levels. You can move it and create a more dynamic geography and adaptive urban planning. And you can introduce various functions on floating structures. Next slide, please. So in many cases, floating is actually more beneficial and more cost efficient in comparison to land reclamation, especially in deeper waters or in areas where the ecosystems are more environmentally sensitive. And some of you might wonder, okay, what is she talking about? What is a floating development still? What is floating city? What are floating projects? There are actually quite some building blocks out there already. Next slide, please. On this slide, you could see some examples, for instance, floating villas or floating soccer field or floating breakwater, as well as some larger development like floating port terminals and floating city visions. And what's also quite popular these days is floating solar and floating wind. So the building blocks are there to construct a floating city. And in fact, there's an increasing momentum at the moment. Next slide, please. In 2019 and 2020, UN Habitat has organized two high-level discussions on sustainable floating city development as a viable solution to climate change, to providing affordable housing, etc. And the main conclusion from these high-level discussions was that there are call for actions to actually design a floating city prototype and to organize a brain trust with increasing science on the knowledge to guide such an initiative. And recently, next slide, please. Recently, this summer, 2 cities have stepped up to actually implement a floating city prototype development, that being Busan City in South Korea and also Singapore. So more and more momentum and interest and attention to such an alternative solution. From our side at Blue 21, one of the largest floating area development project that we are working on at the moment is in the Baltic region. Next slide, please. In collaboration with Finest Bay Area Development, a Finnish company, and a Japanese company, Shimizu Corporation. Together with them, we are looking into providing resilient and future-proof large-scale floating area development in the Baltic area. This is also in association with the Tunnel Initiative, which aims to connect Helsinki and Tallinn with 2 tunnels. So next slide, please. In fact, we are entering a new development phase with large-scale floating development. Floating is not something new anymore. In the past, you see fishermen or indigenous people living on water. More recently, you see more examples of sustainable floating district being built and large floating structures. So we are entering a new phase and closer towards realization of a floating city. Next slide, please. This slide shows some accomplishments of our company, and along the way, we also work very closely with the public sector and private sector, and we keep on innovating and learning from not only the urban sector, but also the maritime sector. In 2015, we established a sister company called Integraal that does water quality and aquatic ecology monitoring using underwater drones. And recently, we have also realized a floating solar project. And last year, we completed a research study on space at sea, providing sustainable and modular living space at sea for different functions in collaboration with 16 other European partners. Next slide, please. So this is our team. We're quite multidisciplinary and international. We have knowledge from both urban sector and also a maritime sector. And you can see some of our key collaborators on this slide as well. What do we do at the Blue 21? Next slide, please. We provide turnkey projects. We provide consultancy, but we also develop technologies which are required for realizing large-scale floating projects. Next slide, please. We do location scans, checking if certain environments or locations are suitable for floating projects. Sorry, next slide, please. Yes. We also monitor the environment, and we, together with clients and partners, we see what needs would be suitable for certain areas, and we provide consultancy. For our in-house technologies, next slide, please. We conduct quite some hydrodynamic studies and using various tools to understand, for instance, the elastic behaviors of very large floating structures. We also analyze effects of shadows that could be produced from floating structures. Next slide, please. So these are next. Yeah, thank you. These are some images of our internal R&D. Next slide, please. This is something else that we've been working on for quite some time, which is a floating city unit. a modular unit design that has incorporates utilities connections, which could be easily introduced to different environments and be built, such as Lego blocks. Next slide, please. This shows an application for area, for instance, in Rotterdam, Mozambique, where we could provide a larger floating district and a more adaptive living environment that could also have the potential of being towed elsewhere in the future to cater to other needs. For instance, some old port areas also needs redevelopment, and floating could be a quite interesting solution for old port areas. Next slide, please. Floating has many functions and also benefits, and could contribute to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And next slide, please. This is the roadmap and our vision for the future towards the realization of a self-sufficient floating city. If you have more questions about floating, please feel free to visit our website or reach out. Thank you again for your attention. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you for amazing presentation. It's nice to see how in the coming years we will have a limited space for build a new house. So now you have more research on to build a new house in the sea and with the floating. So it's so thank you for this presentation, and thank you for your attention, the audience. So now we will go to the Q&A. So our colleague Janet.
Well, Janet transformed into Robin, but that's okay. So just quickly introduce myself. My name is Robin Morelissen, working at Deltaris, as well as Professor Flores, and I am very delighted to be able to help you with the Q&A session here, Loé. Thank you so much for that. And well, perhaps let's start also, Loé, maybe from a quick reflection from your side on these presentations that you've seen so far, and perhaps a starting off question from your side before we give the word to the audience.
You mean questions in the chat? I don't.
Oh, no. I mean, do you have any reflection of what you heard today, and perhaps have a starting off question?
I am just happy with this presentations. Okay. To be honest, a lot of information, a lot of knowledge gained today. So thanks for the experts today, for the speakers.
All right. Then I would like to ask the audience if there are any questions already coming up from your. Yes, there's a microphone coming.
Hello, my name is Amelia Loekmanter, Urban Design from Urban Design ANL. I have a question about the financing of those solutions. Maybe it's quite similar with the question at the session before. Blue 21 has already mentioned a couple of her insights, but I'm just curious about the Deltaris and Okra and Witt van en Bos, and what kind of the most affordable financing for those interesting solutions in your perspective?
Shall we just give the floor to any of those? Jaap, may I start with you, perhaps? You're still on mute, Jaap. Yes.
I had some problems with the internet, but when I understand it right, it was about financing the climate adaptation. And what we see is that when you only make measures for climate adaptation and flooding, it's quite expensive. But if you use redevelopment of areas, construction of new houses, combine it with traffic solutions, greening of areas, then the cost effectiveness goes up. So try to combine solutions.
Thank you very much, Jaap. Sounds very reasonable. Flores, can I continue with you, please?
Yes, sure. Yeah, very good question, because that's one of the challenges, of course, finding space and money, budget for it. we found that, and I think that taps into what Johan was saying as well, with every reconstruction, we're not going to break up a square or a road just for climate adaptation, but when we have to renew it, we're really spending a lot of money. And in those cases, most of the cases, we can implement climate adaptation measures, such as sustainable urban drainage systems or nature-based solutions for the same cost or even cheaper. And there are quite a lot of examples, and I can share a document with some of examples that maybe one to give one perspective. In 2014, Amsterdam won the National Climate Adaptation Award with Tondorp because they totally reconstructed the whole area with implementing swales and rain gardens and hollow roads, everything with less budget, because they could save on the construction of a stormwater drainage system. And that means that if we're talking about flooding, we know that some of these stormwater events are so huge that you cannot control them in a pipe, so to say. So why would you actually construct that pipe? So they minimized the stormwater drainage system and used the roads as drainage. And in those cases, it can be a lot cheaper actually to implement climate adaptation than the regular conservative gray infrastructure, so to say. So that would be and I agree with multifunctional implementations, because then you tap into a lot of budget. In a big municipality as Amsterdam, for example, you have different districts. You have green and gray and blue. And if you do multifunctional, you can tap some money from everything, so you might have more money as well. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Floris. Very interesting. Martin, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, at least I can confirm that adding the various budgets, as Floris is summing up, is completely the right way to do so. And for the larger projects, we are also advocating a holistic approach. So there's a main budget for, let's say, for coastal defense or for river defense, and then adding on top of that the regional budget and the municipal budgets. That really helps, because then gradually you get a big project, and that's something you can tender and gain profit from it. There's even the possibility to have private-public partnership and adding some private budgets as well. That's what we had in several of our projects. Related to the, let's say, the development areas, it's fairly easy, because these development areas, they have large budgets, like the London Meridian Water. The budget is not an issue. The only thing at that moment we need to secure is that budgets are not ticked into separate boxes. So again, you need to have a holistic approach also on the budgets. Since then you can create more green and water in the areas. I think that's basically the big winner, and most of the time it's not a matter of costs and budgets that's a problem. I see most of the time opportunities.
Very good, Martin. Thank you so much for that. And that also brings me to another question that we got in as well. And this, of course, if you start to combine budgets, if you start to combine functions and save money, you also have to deal with different types of stakeholders, with different types of beneficiaries, and also different types of gains that they can get from that. And we've heard throughout that that's a challenging part. I can imagine that as well. And I had a very interesting talk also with Johan from the city of Rotterdam on how to do that. I'm not sure, Johan, if I'm hijacking you right now, maybe to reflect a little bit on how you deal with the fact to include these different types of stakeholders to make a more of a holistic and integral approach, be able to combine budgets and basically have a more sustainable and more supported solution. Can you perhaps reflect on that, how you did that for Rotterdam?
Is this one on? All right. Yes, with our climate adaptation program, we try to be really open. So years ago, our adaptation plan was called Rotterdam Adaptation Strategy, and that actually scared some people already away because it seems so big and a big problem to work on. So we changed our name to Rotterdam Weatherwise, or in Dutch, Rotterdams Weerwoord. Make it more simple and be really open and invite a lot of people to work with us. So we signed an agreement with the water authorities, with the social housing corporations, with the drinking water company, but also have dialogues with real estate developers about how can we work together into climate proofing the city. So it's about being open and also take the time to build a relationship with all the different stakeholders, and then I think you can do a lot in a city and also invest together in a climate-proof city.
Thank you very much, Johan. I think that that's a very good one. Is building relations, building trust is the foundation of all of this happening. And maybe perhaps also one of the consultants can reflect on challenges that you may have faced in projects and how you overcome this. I'm not sure, Jaap, you presented many examples of projects. Do you have any experiences on how you ran into challenges and how you overcame them?
What's the exact question?
Sorry, it's about stakeholder engagement, combining the different gains of the different stakeholders, get them together and work together in the project. Did you encounter that in your projects as well, and how did you deal with that? How could you overcome those?
Yeah, it's I think very important to start really at the beginning of the project, not beginning stakeholders as part of the project, but really. When you define the project, involve the stakeholders because they have their own opinion and their own experience. Certainly, when we are working international, and we have to deal with other cultures, then it's really good to have them present at the start and have their own apply their own standards, their own method of discussing, and then continue. And at the same time. Stakeholders' involvement is very good, but also make it realistic. Look at the financial and economic aspects at every stage of the project. That you don't make promises at the end will be difficult to keep, but involve social aspects and economic aspects in all stages of the project.
Thank you very much, Jaap. I think that's a very valuable lesson and one that we've heard before, I guess. Are there any other questions also from the audience that I can? All right. But there is another question that we had as well from the chat team. I mean, these principles that you also presented, Jaap, but I think that everybody reflects on the sustainable design principles and the multifunction use, and I think we all agree on that. We've seen many examples. What do you think would be necessary to make this the mainstream and just default way of developing our infrastructure worldwide, basically? I think that Vicky, of course, has been working with that concept in mind for, well, the past 14 years, as we've seen. So what do you think, Vicky? What's necessary to make this the default mode of operation?
Yes, that's a very good question, and we realize from various projects that it's very important to have political support in different cities and to have a visionary leadership that would enable more innovative and sustainable solutions. So yeah, it's quite important to also educate different stakeholders on what new solutions are out there and what they would imply to the environment. Because in terms of floating, for instance, actually we realize a lot of people, not only from public sector, but also private sector, have not enough knowledge about it. And so often we need to really explain and show some examples and also share openly about potential effects, both positive and negative effects that a project could bring, and so as to learn together and to brainstorm and come up with solutions. So yeah, that would be my short answer to this question.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Yeah, sharing of knowledge, I think, is a very important one, and sharing experiences as well. Floris, do you perhaps have anything to add from your experience here?
Yeah, well, what I'm thinking about, and of course, it's very, very important to let people participate in the beginning of the project, and that's a hard thing. I showed one tool, for example, Climate Scan. There's a lot of citizen science involved, which helped a lot, because you know, you can have a great project, but if there's resistance from people that actually live in the area where you want to implement it, that could be a disaster. To give you just one practical example, we show a lot of nature-based solutions, small scale in the city or urban dense areas, the most challenging thing. But if people are saying that maybe if you implement it, we will have more mosquitoes. And especially in regions as Dubai or Asia, you would have malaria and dengue, which is, you know, not really a problem yet in the Netherlands. But if and then it comes to maybe that flood fighting that I show. I flood swales or rain gardens and show that they're empty within a couple of days. And of course, a mosquito needs several days, even up to seven days to hatch, to incubate. So that proves that if it's maintained well and it stays in the city, you can answer questions that are very practical and really essential to show that there might be no risk to implement it. So. And that's just one example of how you could run. So it's make it visible, field trips, implement it, monitor it, and of course, as a researcher, I would say do your publications and show researchers as well that we've done that. And this is a very small example. What could help, and that's the last part, is field labs. If you have innovations and you don't know how it works. We have in the Netherlands, but all around the world, for example, Water Street in Delft or a building in Groningen, we have field labs where private, public partners, citizens are welcome. There's education, there's research where it's a physical space where people come together. And we show innovations and we test them so people can see it with their own eyes. And that makes it that people want it. A certain innovation because it relates to them, and you already have a proven concept that you can slowly move to the area. And maybe connecting to Vicky, we were both involved with one of the largest implementations of floating solar in Zwolle. It's 24 hectares, so that's the largest in Europe. And of course, there was a lot of resistance as well. And as well, we did monitoring, field trips, get people involved, and then there's a more positive side. You will always have problems, of course, but if you involve people as large as you can, because sometimes it can be very challenging, you might have a very good basis to have a successful implementation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Floris. And maybe from also the designer's point of view, Martin, is there anything that you say, well, this should be a next step to make this mainstream?
Well, the next step, I think what is really at stake is that we create different type of cities. We call it now looking for how to create a healthy city, which means that we need to change not only from the climate adaptive perspective, but also, let's say, also a holistic approach. Changing infrastructure and accessibility makes a lot of space available. We are now working with smart mobility hubs, and that makes that creates about streets that normally are occupied by cars and parked cars, and these parked cars are in parking facilities or are not present at all, since you have actually already this mobility hub and different types of transportation. That means that we can actually green the city a lot. So if we combine these kind of solutions and create holistic solutions, we get a different perspective on the city, where cycling and walking becomes more present, where we start with healthy movement, consciousness of healthiness, and then, of course, it is, if we created more space for green and water, it's more pleasant and attractive. So all these functions go hand in hand, and if we design it as attractive spaces, but not only saying to people, you cannot have your car in front of your doorstep, but you have nature in front of you, you get something, then I think the design perspectives can help to show people what actually they can gain from it.
Yeah, so that's kind of a mind shift, basically, that needs to be imprinted in the people. I think that's a very nice closing statement as well, Martin. So also in view of time away, I'm going to give the floor back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think it's really interesting today to be with you, and of course thank for you being here on our event, and of course special thanks for our speakers for addressing these interesting topics. I'm looking forward to meet you more in the coming years, maybe in the real life. After half an hour, we will meet again in the session about the resilient coastal system. So thank you for all of you.